What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we are embarking on a new series called Emacs Desktop Environment. I think I just broke my Emacs. So basically what we're going to do is we are going to figure out how to build an Emacs environment from scratch that allows you to control your entire desktop and basically, you know, live in Emacs 100% of the time. Let me just figure out what I did to my screen because I think I lost everything. My OBS has disappeared. I think I entered some strange mode. You quit? Okay. Well, let's see. Can I type? Can anyone see what's on my screen right now? Or me on the video? Because I think my whole computer just locked up completely. Oh, I can't actually see the chat at the moment because everything is hosed. Okay, give me 1 second. Just me? Okay, so you see me and you can't... let's see. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, folks, I have no idea why this just decided to happen all of a sudden. I think maybe the VM and the stream at the same time are killing it. We may have to do another redo like we did last time, unfortunately, because this is not working. Oh, okay. Now all of a sudden something popped up. Let's see. Do I have control of my machine again? I have no idea what I did the last time. Okay, now I can see OBS. Okay, now I can type again. Folks, apologize for that. Something happened. Something locked up my machine briefly, but now I think I'm good again. All right, so let's start over. We are going to be talking about the Emacs Window Manager, EXWM. So this is a very cool package which allows you to use Emacs as your main window manager, your main desktop environment on Linux. So if you are a user of Windows or Mac OS, unfortunately, you're going to have to switch to Linux to use this, but honestly, it's not a bad thing because Linux is pretty great. But the power of EXWM is that it allows you to launch normal X Windows programs and have them appear inside of a normal Emacs buffer so that you can use all of Emacs inbuilt buffer management and window management commands to manage how your windows are placed on screen, switch between windows and buffers, etc. So it allows you to have a much more consistent workflow between the things that you normally do in Emacs plus the things you do in other windows that are not Emacs. Like, you know, if you have programs that you have to use for work or for school, etc., you can use all those in a more integrated way inside of Emacs. So let's see. Let me just go ahead and jump over to my notes and we can talk a little bit more about what the benefits of EXWM are. Let's share the screen here. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, one of the main benefits is that you can use your Emacs key bindings everywhere. So not just in your normal Emacs buffers, but just as a way to control your whole machine. So if you're in a normal X Windows application, let's say Discord or something like that, you can hit Alt X to run commands. You can hit Control X, Control C, all those things as you normally would. So you don't have to live in one independent world when you're in Emacs. You can have the same kind of workflow, the same kind of key bindings, the same kind of automation for things inside of Emacs as well as your normal X Windows. Also, I want to say that we are doing this live for those of you who have seen, so say hi in the chat if you're there and you can still see me because I don't know what's happening at the moment. But if you have any questions, please definitely feel free to leave them in the chat as we go because I'll be happy to integrate them into what we're talking about here. So also, one thing that's kind of cool about EXWM is that you can use any of the cool buffer switching techniques that we have seen so far in the Emacs from Scratch series, which would be like console switch buffer, etc. So you can fuzzy find the windows that you have open at any given point, which is pretty helpful. You can also simulate Emacs key bindings inside of normal X windows. We won't actually show this feature today because we have a lot of stuff to cover, but you can set up key bindings that are like Emacs key bindings, but then they get passed on and converted into other keys inside of the X windows. So if you wanted to emulate Emacs editing commands in some program that doesn't support them, you could easily do that using EXWM. If you're used to other window managers, so if you've used Linux for a while, you've probably heard of i3 or DWM or Awesome, Xmonad, etc. EXWM compares to those by also being a mostly tiling and floating window manager. However, you're dealing with the mechanics of Emacs, so it may take a little bit of getting used to the flow of managing windows in Emacs. However, I will say once you do get used to it, it is a lot better, and it will be hard for you to switch out if you are kind of like embedded into the world of Emacs, because you'll feel so comfortable that it will be hard to replicate the same things in another window manager. So like I mentioned, you could do floating windows in EXWM. You can also full screen windows. You can control the window placement by using hooks. So whenever EXWM manages a window, whenever the window appears, you can set a hook that will allow you to customize the placement of that window, whether it's floating or not, etc. You can also pick which workspace to put the window on, etc. So if you've used i3 before, I think Awesome has some functionality for this. You can set rules basically for what happens whenever a particular window or a particular program opens, which is pretty nice. Okay, so what we're going to do is try to get a basic EXWM configuration running in this stream. And what I'm going to do is use a plain Ubuntu 20 VM to do this. So we're going to use Ubuntu because it's very commonly used and known. We're going to show like the most straightforward setup that you can use that will allow you to try EXWM and also still have your other window manager available in case anything goes wrong or if you want to tweak things a little bit. And a lot of what we show here will transfer over to other Linux distributions like Fedora or Arch, etc. You may have to consult the documentation or consult like the Arch wiki or something if you want to figure out other ways to configure how to set this up. But I think that if you're using GDM as your login manager, then this will work for you pretty easily. I think it will also work with LightDM. So this will be pretty easy to follow, I think, for most people. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So what you need to have first before you start trying to use this is a few packages installed. Obviously, you need to have Emacs installed, but you will also need Git and the 2 font packages that we're using in the Emacs from scratch config, because we're going to basically take that Emacs from scratch config and use it as our basis for EXWM. So I've already cloned this folder over into my Ubuntu VM, and you can see I've got the same Emacs from scratch configuration pulled up. Everything looks the same as we've seen before in previous streams. So let's go ahead and start adding a new section for the, actually, yeah, let's do something else first. The first thing you need to do before you can actually start using EXWM is to boot into Emacs as basically your main desktop environment. So what we need to do is set up a desktop file, and this desktop file defines a session type that your login manager like GDM will pick up on to say, here's how you launch this particular window manager. Since EXWM is a custom window manager, we have to do a little bit of extra work to make this show up, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. So we already have our Emacs from scratch folder. I actually cloned this to .emacs.d so that it's straightforward. We don't need to do any symlinks or anything to get this set up. So I just cloned that same Emacs from scratch repo right to .emacs.d in the home folder. I'm going to create a new folder called EXWM, and I'm going to create a file called exwm.desktop. And I'm going to use Emacs make directory to make that directory since it doesn't exist already. And now I'm going to go over to my notes and grab the contents of this this file. So we will go back and paste this in, and basically what this file says is this is an entry for the EXWM window manager. I got some caps lock issues going on here. Yeah, so the thing is I don't have caps lock set up correctly yet inside of the VM, so my normal caps lock pressing goes to control, but in the VM it doesn't, so I have to watch out for that. So this desktop entry says that we are setting up the Emacs Window Manager, and we're going to launch a particular script inside of my home directory, and this is going to be a script that we're going to create right now. And basically, it's just metadata that is used to identify what this window manager is, and then GDM will be able to pick up on this when we log out of the session to then launch the script that we're going to create. So I'm also going to create the script called start-exwm.sh, and I need to rename this correctly, so rename buffer, or rename file. Actually, let's just kill that and start over again. So we're going to do start exwm.sh. Okay, so now I'm going to go and grab the contents of that as well, and I'll tell you what these things do. So, all right, so what we're doing is this is a very simple script that only just launches Emacs. So once again, I hit the caps lock key. We're going to fix that in a second whenever I get everything set back up. That's the thing with setting up your own custom key bindings. If you're ever on a machine that doesn't have them set up, then you're in for a world of trouble. Is it working now? Oh, Jesus. Okay, here we are, finally. Sorry for that. Okay, so we are launching Emacs. So you can see here that we have Emacs -mm-debug init. And what this means is we're using the mm parameter to say maximize the Emacs window whenever it starts up, because whenever you boot into EXWM, it's going to start an Emacs frame first, but we want that to fill up the whole screen so that it doesn't look weird whenever we're booting into Emacs initially. Also, we are adding the debug init parameters, so that we're saying basically as the init.el file is loading, if we hit any errors, drop into the debugger and show us what the error is so that we have an easier time debugging it, because one thing that you'll find when you use EXWM is if you do anything to your configuration that causes a problem, the next time you boot into EXWM, you're going to end up hitting an error, so you're going to need a way to debug that easily. So this debug init gives you the way to see that information whenever you're booting up. And also, we're wrapping this call to Emacs in a dbus launch command. And what this does is it sets up a dbus session. And if you don't know what dbus is, it's basically a messaging system inside of the Linux desktop that allows programs to communicate to each other through an IPC bus, basically. So we need to do this so that Emacs has access to the dbus session and can send notifications and do other things it needs to do. So it's just a good way to ensure that you have a dbus session set up. It may be the case that if you're using GDM as your desktop manager, that it already has dbus sessions set up, so we're just adding this as a precaution. It will definitely be more necessary whenever you're not using GDM, or if you're using a more minimal setup like I do, where you need to do a little bit more to make sure that you have the proper things configured for your desktop environment. So all of this basically just says let's launch Emacs whenever the window manager is activated. And I'm going to do one extra thing that you do not have to do, but I'm going to do it because I need a way for my VM to have better integration with the host machine, so that I can paste things, etc. It's working already inside of the Ubuntu desktop environment, but I need to do that extra step myself whenever I'm booting into EXWM. So if you're using EXWM in a QEMU virtual machine, you might also want to do this, but otherwise just don't add this to your start exwm.sh. Let's see. I'll answer a couple of questions. So Zerafin asked, do I use Emacs for writing, like tech documentation? Yes, I use Emacs for writing, journaling, writing, pretty much everything that I do using the computer. So let's see. I think that's everything we need to get into boot into Emacs. So, there's one last step that I need to do. So to make this EXWM desktop file discoverable by GDM, we need to set up a symbolic link. So I'm going to run in term mode here. And then I am going to, let's get out of there. Yes, compile that, please. Okay, cool. Let's paste this in. Okay, I'm hitting the home key and it's doing exactly the opposite of what I wanted. So maybe, excuse me, maybe I should just use eShell. Wow, backspace is backwards. Okay, cool. eShell, let's do it. I think it's probably because I hit control again. Once again, I'm shooting myself in the foot. Okay, so we are going to create a symbolic link to the exwm.desktop file over into the, I think I capitalized that. We're over into the user/share/x sessions folder. So this folder is a special place where GDM and other login managers are looking for session files for window managers. So we're going to create this really quickly, and then make sure that it's there. User share x sessions. And then we see Ubuntu and we see EXWM. So now we're going to take the big leap and see if we can boot into our session. So I'm going to log off. So you need to log off so that you get back to your desktop manager. And then once you get to the login screen, you're going to see that there is a button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen once you click your user. If you click this button, you can see now there is an EXWM entry. This wasn't there before, but now we've added it so it shows up. So I'm going to log in, and now the first thing you'll see is that Emacs will pop up as a full screen application. And interesting. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're using the Emacs from scratch configuration without having a normally set up Ubuntu machine, the Forge package expects to have a C compiler available, basically GCC. And since I haven't installed that yet, we have an error there. So let me just go and disable that package temporarily. We'll go to our emacs.org file, look for Forge, and I'll just comment that out. No dynamic expansion for Forge found. That's great. Okay. All right, so then we'll just go ahead and start it over again just so that we're sure that things are going to work correctly. Hopefully that did retangle the file. I think it should have. If it didn't, we will just do it one more time. Okay, so now we have booted into Emacs. So what you might see is that, okay, we have full screen Emacs, but we haven't actually activated EXWM yet. So if you were to launch an application, let's say you open up term mode and you try to use, let's say GNOME calculator, it will pop up, but for some reason these GNOME apps take a long time to start up the first time, so it may take just a second for the show, but it will pop up, but it won't be managed by anything. It would just be a floating X Windows window without anything. You know, you can't actually control it very well. You can interact with it, but you can't do much with it. So once it finally decides to pop up, we will see if we can kill it, and then we will, yeah, I think maybe I could drag it. Yeah, so I can drag it around, but this is just using the bare minimum X Windows functionality. So Emacs isn't having anything to do with this. It's not managing this window. So we're just sort of lucky that we're able to use it in this way. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And now I'm going to go and start trying to add the EXWM configuration that we need. So do I have that buffer? No. Okay, so let's open up our emacs.org file. And I'm going to add the EXWM configuration to this file, but in the next stream, we're going to try to break it out into a separate file since we'll have more things that we want to cover. So this is just going to be a temporary addition. So let's say window management. So I'm going to add EXWM configuration. And then we'll start up a new source block. And then I'm going to go grab the config that I prepared for this episode. Dylan asked, was Forge already covered in a prior video? Yes, it is the projectile and Magit video. I think it's episode number 4 of Emacs from scratch. Elementare asked, won't EXWM hang often because of Emacs single-threaded nature? It can hang. That's one of the downsides of using EXWM is that since Emacs Lisp does not have threading, or at least at the time that we're talking about this, it doesn't have threading. If you do anything synchronous that blocks Emacs, then you might lose access to programs or the ability to do things. However, if you just keep hitting Control-G, a lot of times it will back out of whatever you're doing so that you get control again. So that's something that doesn't end up being a problem a lot of the time because you can always sort of get back out of a problem, but every once in a while you may have to kill your Emacs session to get out of it. Okay, so we're going to start with the very, very basic EXWM configuration first, and then we will add some more of the stuff that I have later in the file. So what we're adding here is the use package statement for EXWM, and we're also I should have added that hook, but let's do it without it first. Once again, the problem with that. Okay, so very basic config. All we're doing is setting up the EXWM package from use package. So it's going to install this from ELPA. So ELPA is the GNU package repository for Emacs. This is one of those packages that actually is able to live there because it has the full copyright assignment to the Free Software Foundation, etc. So we can install it from there. We're also setting the initial number of workspaces to 5 because it's 1 by default, and the consequence of this is that whenever you switch to another workspace, it has to create a new frame. So I believe this might pre-create the frames for all of the workspaces. We'll talk about how that works whenever we get to the later section. So I think this might be enough for a very, very basic setup. But to save time, maybe I'll add a couple other things just because we'll have to reboot a couple times to make this work. So I will add some key binding configuration as well. I'll jump back over. Yeah, I have to do some key binding tricks every once in a while to get out of this window. Okay, so I'm gonna grab the prefix keys. I'll also grab this. Yeah, let's grab everything. I don't know. I think it's better just to go ahead and just see everything as it works. So I'll just paste all this in, and I think that should be balanced. Okay, so because we're setting up EXWM, we need to do this as we need to basically, when Emacs starts up, we're gonna have to do this at startup time. Now, actually, I think that since we haven't set up EXWM yet, I could probably just evaluate this now and use it. So let's try it first and see if we can do this without having to restart the X session. And then I'll explain to you what all this stuff does. So we were going to use Control-X, Control-E to evaluate all this. And we're installing EXWM and its dependencies now. And now I think we might be running EXWM enable. We'll see. So that did not. Okay, so EXWM init. Might be doing something, we'll see. Okay, so whenever you initialize EXWM, what it does is it sets up multiple frames, individual frames for all the workspaces, and then makes it so that X windows can now be managed. So let me see if I run an X application, if it will work correctly. So instead of using the terminal to launch an application, I'm going to use a different built-in key binding. This is Alt ampersand. And this runs the async shell command function or command. And I will tell it to run Mahjong. I think it's how it's, or GNU Mahjong, which is a great game. So now you see that the GNU Mahjong window comes up, but it actually shows up in an Emacs buffer instead of showing up as just a normal floating window. So if one downside of using that async shell command thing is that it pops open another buffer for all the output from the command. So I'm just going to close this out, and I'll show you another way to launch applications. But now we see, excuse me, see that the window is basically fully screened. You can still see your mode line here. It says we're in an EXWM buffer. If I wanted to split this window, I could use Control-X 3 to split to the right. And now you see that the window has been resized. So now we have another buffer open that we could go back to our emacs.org config. So now you can see that we have a normal X window next to an Emacs buffer. And you can continue to do splitting of windows here. You could do Control-X2, I think, to open up a window below that. So you can basically place windows however you want. And also, the thing to know is when you launch an application, the buffer that the window you're currently in, the Emacs window that you're currently in, is the place where that window will show up. This can also be a little confusing sometimes because, like, let's say you try to launch an application and it takes a couple seconds to start up. If you change workspaces or you change which Emacs window you're currently in, it will pop up wherever you are at the moment when the window appears. So you'll either have to use some hooks to make sure it goes where you want, or just don't leave the current window you're in until the window appears. Otherwise, you'll have to figure out how to move it around. So I can use another way to launch an application, which is a key binding that I set up just now, which I'll tell you about in a second, which is super ampersand. So super is the Windows key on most keyboards. It's called super in Linux. So if I do super ampersand, we get this mini buffer prompt at the bottom with a $sign. And I can also type in the name of a program here. So I'm going to type in arander, which is a useful program, but we may actually not have it installed yet. What else do we have? GNOME calculator again. Let's try that again, since we know it works. Okay, calendar, whatever. So we'll give that a second to decide to boot up. So now we see that in this whole pane that was here, the GNOME calendar started up, which is great. I can also use my key bindings to switch buffers. Excuse me. I can switch back to terminal. I can also switch back to the EXWM2 buffer. I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So basically any of Emacs buffer switching commands will work here to manage which buffers are visible at any given point. There is another command you can use for switching buffers. It is EXWM workspace switch buffer. Switch to buffer. So whenever you run this command, it gives you a list of all of the windows that are available, plus the other buffers that are active on this workspace. So I can switch to the EXWM window, and if you switch which window is active in a given window, it will cause that window to jump to another buffer. So it's not possible to have the same X window active in two windows on a workspace or on two workspaces. It can only show up in one place at one time. So this makes sense because you can't have two of the same window on other window managers. So in Emacs, the way EXWM handles this is that it just moves the window to the new location instead of trying to show it twice, basically, because it's not really possible to do that. All right, let's see what else we want to talk about in this setup. So launching windows, splitting windows we've done. So there is the possibility that you can move windows around between buffers. So like in i3, you can move a window to different locations on the screen inside of the tiling setup. There are commands called winmove, swap states left, right, up, down, etc. in Emacs 27, but they're not available in Emacs 26. So we'll, in a future episode, maybe the next episode, we will show another package you can use to do that. But for now, we're going to avoid that. One thing you can do, though, is you can easily move between the frames that are open using the wind move commands that are a part of Emacs 26 and 27. So wind move left. If you use that, it will jump to whatever window is to the left of the current window. So I can also use the super left, right, up, down keys to do that because I've bound those, and I'll show you that in a second. So now I'm basically moving between all these windows using the super key plus the arrow keys. It may be hard to see that on the stream. Let's see, what else can we show? So also, you can make a window floating by running the EXWM floating toggle floating command. I think that has a default key binding of Control-C, Control-T, Control-F, I want to say. Yep. So when you do that, it actually makes the window pop up as a floating window, which you can't drag around. And I wonder if we can see it. Yeah, most times you'll see a mode line at the bottom of these windows. There is a way to turn that off, and I'll show you that in the next episode. But I think that right now it's not showing because the window is probably big enough that it won't display it. You can also toggle that back into being a managed window in the tiling setup by using Control-C, Control-T, Control-F to toggle. At the moment, it is not working there, but you can still run the EXWM floating toggle command to make it jump back into an Emacs window. So that's always something that can be reversed. Full screen. So I don't know if I have this set up here. Yeah, I need to set up the key binding for Super F, and I'll do that in just a second. But you can use the EXWM layout toggle full screen. And what this does is it makes the application full screen to take up the whole screen. And another interesting aspect of this is that it makes Emacs key bindings not work the same way anymore. It actually turns the window into character mode versus line mode, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. So let's see if I actually have trouble getting back out of this now, because I don't know if it will let me get out. I think if I press like maybe F11 or something. Okay, maybe not. Well, we could just play Mahjong here, or we could try to find a way to get out of the window. So maybe if I use Alt F4. All right, so from here, I'm gonna switch to another workspace so I can kill this. So I'll use a command that I haven't discussed yet, but I'll tell you about it another day, called proced. So I just killed that so we can go back to our other workspace. Okay, So now let's see. Wait, I should go to 0. Yeah. So let's talk about the configuration that we put in here, because right now, this is all kind of a little bit mystifying. So first of all, because these windows are running in Emacs, you need a way to still make sure that you can get to Emacs prefix keys whenever you are using that window. So in EXWM, there is a mode called line mode, which is always turned on by default for new windows. And basically what line mode does is, it's like term mode when we talked about in, I think, episode 9 of Emacs from Scratch, where in line mode, Emacs key bindings are still available. And then you have to go into a mode called care mode so that all keys go directly into the buffer itself. In this case, in line mode, we set up these EXWM input prefix keys to say all of these keys are things that I want to go to Emacs and not to the underlying window. So if you use any special prefix keys in your configuration that are not sort of like default prefix keys in Emacs, like Control X or Control C, you're going to need to add them to this list. And in fact, I did that here with the Control Space prefix key, since I use that a lot in my leader key setup. And also Control Alt J, which I use for switching buffers. So you'll need to add these prefix keys inside this EXWM input prefix keys variable to make sure that all of these keys you can use them all, basically. So obviously we see Meta X here, Alt X, a lot of these common things that you would normally use in Emacs. So oops, I think I did it again. There we go. Let me get back to this thing. Oh boy. Always love hitting buttons after screwing up caps lock. Let me make sure that I'm back in the right mode. Okay. So let's use Control HV on this real quick just to see what the description is. I might need to turn down the music a little bit. Okay, so when you look at the value for this, it's kind of mystifying because it's all numbers in this list. But these are actually key codes in a sense, and you don't have to set them like this. Obviously, we're using these special sort of character sequences to set this. These are actually called key sequences, and these are character literals. So this !/C just means control, and the -X is like the next part of the key sequence. So each of these is understood by Emacs to mean this is the key code basically for Control H, Control U, etc. And this documentation says this is a list of prefix keys that EXWM should forward to Emacs when in line mode, like I mentioned before. The point is to make keys like Control X, Control F forwarded to Emacs in line mode. So all of that makes it so that we can use like Emacs, etc. Another thing that's interesting is that for the things that are not in your input prefix keys list, you want a way to be able to send another prefix that isn't set up like that, because maybe in some programs you still want like Control V to work the way that it's supposed to, or Control W or whatever. No, this is actually to do the opposite of that. So if you need to send Control X in a program and you have Control X set up as a prefix key, there is this EXWM input send next key that you can bind to a character to say, I'm going to press Control Q first, and then I'm going to press Control X, and I want that next Control X to go to the EXWM window. That basically makes it so that if you have these prefix keys set up, you can still send those same keys to the window if you need to. So that can be helpful sometimes, especially for things like Control C for a copy. Also, EXWM input global keys. These are global key bindings that are available in all input states for EXWM. And these keys are the things that you want to be for your top level window management. You don't want to set like normal stuff in this, like Control X, etc., because you need to be able to have a choice about when those things are used. But these keys are special in that they're supposed to be the ones that you're using to control your whole EXWM setup. So there are things here like, we use super for all these because super is like an unused key for the most part in Linux. So we can use any of the super key combinations to set up our personal bindings. And probably if you've used i3 or other window managers, you've probably used the super key for this kind of thing before, so it won't be unfamiliar to you. So super R causes you to run EXWM reset, which means that when you are in full screen mode or in character mode, hitting super R will always take you back to a mode where you can control using Emacs again. So that's a very important one to know about. Also, I set up these window movement commands, which are not moving windows, it's just moving between windows. So like that directional movement between the panes that you have open. For all of the super left, right, up, down keys. You can also use HJKL for this as well if you like Vim key binding, so you can just change that to HJKL here. However, we're using the bracket syntax a little bit differently with the arrows because it needs that for these particular keys. If you want to use HJKL, you're going to have to use this / syntax. So for example, I would do / S J for super J. So that's another thing to keep in mind there if you wanted to use that type of syntax. Okay, once again, I hit the control key. I'm gonna fix that in a minute so that we won't run into that again. All right. Also, we have the bindings for. Come on, man. All right. So also we have the bindings for launching commands. So the super ampersand that we saw before. That causes the start process shell command that we mentioned before, which basically launches an application without having that output buffer that shows up. And then also we have commands for switching workspaces, which I'll describe in the next section where we talk about the workspaces. The last thing that's very important in your Emacs config or EXWM config is to call EXWM enable, which basically initializes your EXWM session. And a lot of the configuration you see here for EXWM, it needs to be done before you call EXWM enable or EXWM init. Otherwise, it won't work. In fact, changing your global key bindings will not work after you've called EXWM init. You have to start over your EXWM session. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. It must be some limitation with EXWM or with X Windows, but just keep that in mind. If you want to change your global keys, you're going to have to restart your EXWM session after you do that. All right, so let's see. The next thing we want to talk about is workspaces. So workspaces are great for sort of, separating things in your workflow. And I use it a lot for having different types of applications on different workspaces so I can get to them quickly. So like for workspace 0, I'll have chat windows like for Telega.el, etc., or IRC. For workspace 1, I'll have like the code that I'm writing. For workspace 2, I'll have browser windows. And for workspace 3, I'll have other chat apps like Discord, etc. So having these on different workspaces makes it very easy for me to flip between them without having to use buffer switching commands. So I kind of recommend your workflow to be like, use your workspaces for specific things that you do so that you can easily switch to them and be back at the state that you need to be in to use the program that you're trying to get to, basically. I'm going to answer a couple questions here. So let's see. Frere asks, when you use EXWM, should you open an Emacs instance to do Emacs stuff, or could you use Emacs stuff directly in the root window? Yeah, just use Emacs normally as it's EXWM. You don't need to run another Emacs inside of it. That would be a little bit overkill. Let's see. Do you know how to make replace buffer in Windows not open another EXWM mode window when closing opening a new window? Johan, I don't know the answer to that, but if you comment on the video after, I can go look it up and see if I can figure that out. Dylan asked, does EXWM read the .desktop files on your system? For example, if you have custom desktop files for specific application launch commands. Not by default. However, there is a command that comes with console that can do that for you, which is really useful. I wasn't planning to cover it until the next episode, but I'll show you real quick. If you use meta-x and use console, actually, let me jump over to the other window. If you use meta-x and use console Linux app, this will give you a list of all the desktop files or the applications that are installed on your computer. It tells you the name of the program first before telling you the title of the desktop file, which is a little annoying. You can figure that. I'll show you next stream. But using this, you can run applications that are sort of installed on your machine, which is easier than trying to run them from the console command. So thank you, Dylan, for asking that. That was a useful tip to bring up. All right. So workspaces. Right now, I believe we're in workspace 0. Obviously, you can't tell what workspace we're in because there's no indication on the screen what the workspace is. That's because Doom mode line doesn't natively have the ability to show you your EXWM workspace. In the next episode, we're going to show how to actually set that up, but we just don't have time to cover it today. What you can do, though, is use the super W binding. And that's something we have actually here. You can see super W is EXWM workspace switch. I'm moving my mouse at the top of the screen here. And we see now in the mini buffer, it says switch to, and we have all the numbered workspaces, and we can see that we are in number 0. If I press 1, it will jump us to workspace 1. If I use Super W, I can use plus or minus, I think, to move to the next. Oh, that actually adds a workspace, so it will create a new workspace for you. So if you wanted to dynamically add new workspaces, you could easily do that. So now I'm on workspace 2. Also, there is this sort of confusing looking bit of Lisp code here that actually sets up super bindings for each of the number keys from 0 to 9. So I can hit super 1, super 2, super 3, super 0 to go to those different workspaces. And this is a key binding that I'm using all day long. This is like the core of my workflows. I'm using super 1, super 0, etc. And actually I bind the key that's next to 1 on the number row, which for me is the grave key or the tilde key basically. I bind that to workspace 0 so that it's even easier to hit. I can hit the super key with my thumb and then hit the grave key with my ring finger to get to that very easily. So that could be a time saver as well. In fact, let me see can I just copy that over from my configuration real quick. Let's see. Workspace. Okay, we're getting there. It's down here, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I can copy this little piece over to the config, and if I put it on a line by itself, it will work. There we go. So basically, this line just says with the grave key, and if your keyboard has a different configuration where it doesn't have the grave key like the US keyboard does, you may need to change the character for this. But for me, it's the grave key. I'm binding that to call the EXWM workspace switch create command. And actually, this command is useful to know because you can call it yourself in any eLisp code that you write if you're trying to automate some workflow that you have. So if you look at the definition for this function, basically says switch to the workspace at index or create it first if it doesn't exist. So if I wanted to go to workspace 6, which does not exist yet, I can type EXWM workspace switch create and put 6 as the number. And now it will jump me to workspace 6, which we can see down here. I'm in number 6. All right, so let's move on from that. So is there anything else interesting? Yes. So let's run an application real quick. We'll use Council Linux app for that right now, just because it's nice to use. So Council Linux app. And I'm going to run Firefox. So let's load up Firefox real quick. And that will pop up in this window. And maybe we don't want Firefox to be on this workspace. Maybe we want it to be somewhere else. So I'm going to press Control-C, Enter, and it's asking me where I want to move the Firefox window to. So I'm going to move it to Workspace 1 instead by pressing the number 1. And now when I switch to Workspace 1, we see Firefox again. So if you want to start a window somewhere and you're like, oh, I loaded it on the wrong workspace, you can easily hit Control-C, Enter, and then press the number of the workspace you want that window to go to, and it will be moved. That's a pretty convenient way to do things. Let's see. Anything else about workspaces? One interesting thing to note, like I mentioned earlier, is windows are attached to a single Emacs window on a single frame. So you can't have the same window on multiple workspaces. And the consequence of this is that, let's say if I open switch buffer here, I can see that, once again, caps lock. I need to fix that. We can see that the EXWM2 window is here for Firefox. We can actually, arrow through the buffers and see that. But if I were to go to workspace number 2 and do Control-Alt-J, that EXWM window is not here in this workspace. So it's not in the buffer list at all. You need to keep that in mind because if you want to find a window, you have to be on the workspace where that window exists. There are some settings you can use to get around this problem, but I found them to be more problematic than not. I will cover them in another episode just so that you have that as an option, but I would say it's better to get used to the idea that a window is on a specific workspace and you won't find it in the buffer list unless you're on that workspace. So let's see, let me go back to the config again. Okay, I think once again, caps lock. All right, I think I'm good now. All right, so Let's get to the point now where I can fix a problem that I've been running into this whole time. Let's do some more configuration that will help us to rebind caps lock to control so that we can have that be by default all the time. The stuff that we're going to get into now is not specifically EXWM related, but it's going to be like how to get your desktop experience a little bit more smooth for daily use, because the point of the stream is to get a EXWM setup that you can use to try it out. And then in the future streams, we're going to build on that and make it a lot better and a lot more compelling if you're looking for a reason to switch to EXWM. So we are going to use xmodmap. That is a program that may be installed by default on your Linux distribution, or it may not. So you need to check and make sure. But it is available pretty much in every Linux distribution. So you should be able to find it if you need to. We're going to use that program to rebind caps lock to control, and we're also going to add some Lisp to our code to start xmodmap whenever EXWM starts. So I'm going to go and create that file in the EXWM folder, xmodmap. Then I'm going to paste it in and save it. And then we're going to go back to our emacs.org, and we're going to go to our EXWM configuration and pop up a little bit here. And I'm going to put this above pretty much everything else. And we're going to say start process shell command. Start process shell command is a useful tool to use for launching processes asynchronously so they don't block Emacs, and also not having a buffer that has the output. So we're going to say xmodmap here. We're going to pass nil for the second parameter because I think that defines what buffer the output goes to. And since we don't want that, we say nil. And then we say xmodmap. The third parameter is the command to run. So we're going to say xmodmap.emacs.d/exwm/xmodmap. And then I'm going to just run this. Control X, Control E. It ran xmodmap. And now if I use Control C, it should work. But let's see if it actually did. Yeah, it didn't work right now. I may have to restart my... Oh, no, this is why. I put the wrong path. Let me fix that. And then Control X, Control E, and now Control C does not work. As always, you got to deal with the little problems here and there. Let me make sure that I'm not missing anything in this command. Yep, that looks right. I think that the file is also right. xmodmap, yep. I saved it. And I can try to run it manually. So xmodmap, emacs.d, exwm, xmodmap. Okay, so if I use Control C, yeah, now it works. Okay, so maybe it just didn't work from the Emacs config at that moment, but it does work to do this in general. So start process shell command for that. So we'll just add a little comment, rebind caps lock to control. So this is basically the process you're going to use for running other programs in the background to customize your desktop session. So right now we're using xmodmap. We're also going to see how to set the the screen resolution as well, and set the DPI. So let's look at the config here. So for setting screen resolution, you can see that the screen we're looking at right now, this is like 800 by 600 resolution. It's square. It looks terrible. Everything's kind of blurry. We're going to try to set a more natural resolution for our session here. Let's go back to term. Actually, I want to install a program called arandr. Sudo apt install arandr. So you may have heard of xrandr before. Xrandr is a program that allows you to set your displays up in X Windows. So you can basically turn screens on and off, set the resolution for the screens, set the screen placement, etc. It's a great program to use for automating this stuff, but it's also kind of hard to use if you're trying to figure out the command line arguments to it. So I use the arandr program as a graphical way to set up this kind of configuration. And then we can export the config to a command line that we can actually run and use to automate our Emacs setup. So I've run arandr here, and now we see that there is a virtual output system in a VM. If you have multiple screens on your system setup, you may see multiple squares here. You may see multiple outputs in the outputs list. We'll talk about multiple displays in another stream because there's some extra stuff that you need to do to set that up correctly. But at least for this case, what we're going to do is set the resolution here. So when you go to the resolution list, you'll see that there is a list of possible resolutions. I'm going to pick this 2048 resolution because it's 16 by 9 and it works pretty well for this machine. I'm going to press the check mark, and you'll see that it does change the resolution, but the frame itself does not actually update to fill the whole space. We need to load a different package for EXWM to make this happen, and I'll show you that after we do this next step. So that we can get the xrender command that arender just used and then use it for ourselves for future purposes, we need to save that layout. So we're going to click layout, click save as, and then it's going to bring us to this .screen layout folder. I'm just going to type in exwm.sh because it's a batch file and save it. Then I'm going to exit out of this. Then I'm going to go open that file myself. I'll go to .screen layout and then open exwm.sh. And now we can see it wrote out this xrender invocation that we can basically just steal for our own purposes. We don't need to run the shell file. You could do it if you want to. You could use that start process shell command to just run this directly, which is totally fine. But in my case, I'm just going to copy the xrender command directly. So I'll kill this buffer. I'll go back to our emacs.org, and then I will come here and say set the screen resolution. And then we'll do start process shell command xrender nil, and then we'll paste in the text that we copied if it lets me. Okay, I may have to go and reopen that file again because apparently I lost it. .screen layout .exwm. We'll copy this line, go back to the other buffer, and then we will paste that in. All right, so now we've got this line, but this is not the only thing we have to do because we need to set up the render module for EXWM. So I'm going to load the built-in render module, EXWM render, and then I'm going to use, I think it's EXWM render enable. Let me go double check that real quick, make sure I'm not using the wrong thing. EXWM render enable. And what this is going to do is make it so that whenever EXWM starts up, we'll be able to set the screen resolution to what we expect it to be before EXWM finishes initializing. It's important to note that you can't load EXWM render after EXWM init has already happened. You're going to have to restart your session, and you have to make sure that you're calling all of this before EXWM enable in your config. So I'm going to go ahead and just exit out of Emacs. Probably I didn't mention this before, but when you exit Emacs, it basically logs you out of your session, which is good because of what we want. So I'm using Control-X, Control-C to exit as normal. And one thing it will tell you if you have X windows open is it will say that there's active processes that you've created that still exist. It sort of just gives you that last moment chance to say, oh, maybe I don't want to reboot just yet. So that's just a thing to know. I'm going to type in yes here and press enter to make sure that it goes ahead and restarts. And I think Firefox is not wanting to leave, so we're going to just kill it manually there. Okay, so we will start this back up now. I'm going to log in. And now we should see that the session, after the initial little screen shows up, it will set the resolution. And then whenever EXWM initializes fully, now EXWM will fill the whole screen, and it will be the resolution that we desire. Let me just check the questions in the chat real quick. Let's see. Stefan says, have you tried using defun and setting the key binding to the quoted name of the function? Yes, I have one example of that, which I will show in just a second. All right, so let's just show that real quick, because I actually did mean to cover something else, and I missed it before. So let's just quickly look at that. Let's open up our Emacs configuration. So one thing that you may have seen so far is that every X Windows window that we open up, the buffer name is always EXWM and then some number after it. Maybe what we want is for the actual program name to show up there whenever we're in that buffer so that it's easier to find it. So I do have something in the config for that. I just have not enabled it yet. So let's go look for the EXWM config. And I have this function called EXWM update class. And I'm adding a hook for this hook called EXWM update class hook. So in X Windows, there is a concept of a window class, which basically says this is sort of like the general category for this window, and it's probably something like Firefox or Discord or Pigeon or something like that. So we're adding a hook so that when EXWM sees that a window has a class name that has changed, we're going to call this function EFS EXWM update class, And what that's going to do is it's going to call this other function, EXWM rename, workspace rename buffer, to change the name of that buffer to reflect the class name for that buffer. So let me set up that hook really quick. I will evaluate this code, and I will also evaluate this code. Now I'm going to run Firefox. I'm going to use the super ampersand for that. So we'll run Firefox. And then when Firefox starts up, we'll see now that it says Firefox as the buffer name. And when we try to switch buffers, we can see Firefox is the name here. So the nice thing is if I create another Firefox window, like if I do Control-Shift-N, I think, or Control-N maybe, and it creates a new window, those windows get numbered as well. So you can see like there's multiple Firefox windows and you'll know how to switch between them. So that does make things a little bit easier for that. So hopefully that answers that question. So now, what else do we need to do? Let me check my stuff here. So one other thing you might want to do is set the DPI of the screen. So let's say you have a high DPI screen, like a 4K screen or something. Maybe you start up EXWM in the appropriate resolution and the text is super tiny. You can use the XRDB command to solve this problem. So what you need to do is create an X resources file that basically has the desired DPI for the screen. The one that I'm setting here might actually be kind of big, so we're going to see how that goes. But we will go into our setup here, and we're going to create this EXWM/X, EXWM/X resources file. I'm going to paste in that line. And basically the thing to know about this DPI number is the bigger the number is, the bigger the UI will look. So don't set it too high if you don't want it to be huge looking. So now that we have this file, I can go back into my EXWM config, and I can run XRDB. But you want to do this before Emacs starts so that it's already set before the Emacs window shows up. So we're going to add this to our start EXWM script. So I'm going to go into this script. I'm going to add it right at this point. Set the screen DPI. So if you notice that your screen looks fine to you on your monitors, then you don't have to do this step, but it's just a nice thing to do in case you want a better experience. So I'm going to exit out of Emacs and log back in again so we can see what the effect of that setting is in our case. So let's log back in one more time. And this time, the text looks a little bit bigger because we've bumped up the DPI. In fact, it looks probably too big for this particular screen. It looked better on another screen that I had, so I don't really know what the explanation would be there. But I'm going to go and set that to something a little bit more reasonable. Let's set it to like 100 maybe. EXWM. And then X resources, and we'll set that to 100. So since it's too big, we're going to just drop it down a little bit. And then we will start Emacs one more time and then see what it looks like. Okay, this time it seems more reasonable size. So this is another nice thing to know for making sure that your UI looks like you would want it to be. Okay, one last useful UI trick is if you are used to having a system tray in a panel inside of your window manager for things like your Wi-Fi connection or chat apps like Discord or Slack that have system tray icons, you can also have that in EXWM, and we're going to quickly show how to do that since it's pretty important for just like basic usage of EXWM. So I'm going to go into our Emacs config one more time. I'll jump back down to our EXWM config, and I'm going to add this at this point after we actually no, I'll put it after we set the screen resolution. And what this does is loads another module called EXWM system tray, and then we enable the system tray. But once again, we have to do this before EXWM init happens. So we're going to have to restart Emacs one more time just to see this work. So let me just quickly do that again. Hopefully the file got written out before I did that. So let's log back in. And one thing you might notice is that as we keep booting back into this, the startup time is a little bit slow in getting all this to load up. There's some things that we can do to improve Emacs startup time, which we will cover in another video, probably an Emacs tips video that's separate, or possibly another Emacs from scratch video. So that'll be coming in the future. Okay, so now we've activated the system tray, but you don't actually see it because there's no system tray icons yet. So one thing you can do is run a program like NM Applet, which is the network manager system tray application that gives you information about your connections. If I run that, now you see in the bottom right-hand corner on the screen, we get a little icon for the network manager applet. If you click on it, you can get to all the stuff that you're used to seeing from that app. So this is a pretty important thing to have if you want to use this config, just to try it out, because some apps you use will probably want to put things there and you won't be able to find them if you don't have this. So it's a good thing to have set up. So let's see, Dylan says when he runs EXWM on his 4K ThinkPad and set the DPI to 2, all the text is really blurry, like the aliasing is all wrong. Well, at least with the config we're going to do next week, I'll show you how to set up your anti-aliasing for text whenever you have high DPI so that you can control it a little bit better. So I have a solution for that we can talk about next week. Prashant asks, how do you copy and paste text with EXWM in X Windows? It's a good question, actually. So let's go into Firefox real quick, and then we will see what we can do to copy text. So let's say I wanted to copy some text from this field. So I'm going to type in EXWM here, and I'm going to select the text. I think that since I've selected it, it will go into what X Windows considers the primary selection. So if I switch back to the messages, or maybe the scratch buffer, I think if I were to hit Shift Insert, it will do that, but sorry, it would paste it, but apparently it didn't in this case. So if you go into Firefox, you can right-click the text and hit Copy. It will put it in the clipboard. And then if we go to the scratch buffer, if I use Shift Insert, it will paste it. So if you use the normal copy command inside of your X Windows, then you can paste it using Shift Insert inside your buffer. I think also you can use yank. So let's see, yank. Yeah. If you use the yank command, or if you use P in the Evo mode, it will also paste it in. So the normal pasting commands that you use in Emacs will work with things that you copied from the X Windows buffers. Another thing to mention is, like I said before, you can use Control-C to copy, but since we have that set up as a prefix key here, Control-C will pop open your panel for your Control-C prefix. To avoid that, you need to press Control-Q first. So let's say I type in EXWM rocks, select it. I'll hit Control-Q, then Control-C. Sorry, let me do that one more time. Control-Q and then Control-C, and now that will have copied that text. If I go back over to the scratch buffer, we can see that if I jump down a little bit and paste it, it pastes EXWM rocks. So hopefully that tells you what you need to do for that. It's a great question, actually, because this is a common problem people might have with EXWM. Okay, almost done here. So one last thing I want to tell you about is what happens when things go wrong. So if, let's say that we are in our Emacs config. Let's open that back up again, and let's introduce an actual problem to the configuration. So let's say I remove a parenthesis so that there's going to be a syntax error in the input file. So let's exit Emacs real quick. So what I'm going to do is log back into my session. And we're going to see that there's going to be an error that pops up in the very beginning, end of file during parsing. So right now we've got like very little go on about what happened. We can at least see that it says end of file during parsing. So in this case, we can use our normal built-in Emacs key bindings like Control-X, Control-F. And the thing that's really useful to do for this is to open up your init.el file and then use Alt-X to run the check parens, like parenthesis command. It will jump your cursor to the line that has the problem with parenthesis. So if the problem that you have is that the parentheses are unbalanced and you just have a syntax error, it's very easy to fix that. So in this case, we're going to fix it in our init.el directly so that we can boot back into our real configuration, and then we'll fix it in our org file. So now I will just use Control-X, Control-S to save that file. I'll use Control-X, Control-C to exit. And now I can log back in one final time to show that will finally boot correctly, and then we'll have to go back and fix our org file to get the configuration back to where it needs to be. Stefan says, instead of doing global set key, you could try define function name global set key. Yes, yeah, that was the tip from defining a function that for the key binding handler. So we will go back to our emacs.org file and then fix that one little line. One other thing that you could use if things go really wrong and you can't even get booted into Emacs, something bad happens. One thing you can normally do is you either boot into one of your other window managers to fix a problem, or you can use like the Control, Alt, and Function keys to get to a virtual terminal, and then you're basically going to boot into a terminal, log in there, and then use like Emacs. You can use the Emacs -Q-NW. Let me show you that real quick. Which would basically run Emacs in a terminal without using your current configuration. It's basically running it in terminal mode. So that might be a way that you can easily try to fix any problem that you come up against whenever you are trying to change your configuration and you can't boot back into EXWM. Also, you could use Vim if you wanted to, because it's pretty easy to use on a command line. So this is another option in that case. All right, let's see. I think that was everything I wanted to talk about for today's episode. I know it was a little bit longer than usual, I think, but we really needed to cover the groundwork to get a good basic configuration that you can take and try yourself so that for next week, you'll be able to understand the things that we do next. So what I want to do next week is cover how you can set UI themes for your X Windows apps, as well as the icon themes. Set up desktop notifications so that whenever applications show you pop-ups, you'll actually see them, because right now you won't see them. And then other tips on like window management and key bindings, just to make it a more smooth experience and more like what you might have seen in i3, etc. Then in future videos of the series, we're going to show how to set up a better panel integration so that you have more of that sort of status information that you are used to from normal window managers or desktop environments like XFCE or GNOME or KDE, etc. And some other cool integrations we can do with other programs to make the experience better, especially a really cool workflow for using browsers inside of EXWM. There's something that you might not have thought about before that is pretty cool, and we're going to show that too. So hopefully what we covered today was useful for you to get started, and then you'll be able to follow along next week and in the future episodes to talk about this stuff. Stefan asked, can I go over EXWM render next week? Well, yeah, we'll go over basically how to do multiple monitor management in a future stream. Probably a couple streams from now, we'll talk about that. It'll be a pretty useful thing to talk about. All right, so before we go, I would like to thank our sponsors. So we have gotten up to like 19 now, I think, and our current goal is to get to 30 sponsors. The plan is that when we hit 30 sponsors, I'm going to do a video, an Emacs tips video on how to read your email in Emacs with MU4E. So if you're interested in learning how to read and send email from Emacs, you'll definitely want to watch for that video. But if you want that video to come faster, because we're going to do it anyway, but if you want it to happen earlier, then help us get to 30 sponsors, and we'll do it basically as soon as we get to 30 sponsors. So I want to call out specifically Craig Jennings and the Nerdy Hamster. Both of those guys have sponsored at the $15 level, which is amazing. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate all the other sponsors who have joined up. So if you're interested in learning more about that and to support the stream, go check out github.com/sponsor/DavidWill, and all information is there. All right, I think that's everything for today. Don't want to take up any more of your time. So definitely come back next Friday at the same time. Be sure to click subscribe and the bell to be notified before we go live. Also, join the Discord. There's a link to the Discord in the chat and in the description in case you are interested in talking to like-minded people who are having a lot of fun talking about Emacs, EXWM, etc. We're there pretty much every day. So anyway, until next time, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Thank you all who came here in the live chat today. It was great to have you all here. And happy hacking. See you next time.